Exactly 1 minute after my divorce became final, I quietly took all my evidence and headed for the airport. My ex-husband was happily waiting at the hospital for his mistress to give birth. Little did he know, the doctor was about to step out and say a single sentence that would drain the blood from his face and bring him to his knees. At exactly 9:17 a.m., the dissolution of marriage between myself, Quinn Anderson, and David Harrison was officially recorded. I stood outside the Manhattan Supreme Court, clutching the freshly printed documents. My fingertips brushed against the ink that terminated our marriage, and my heart was so eerily calm that it even surprised me. 3 years as a wife, over 1,000 days of telling myself to compromise for the sake of our family, all neatly packaged into a few thin sheets of paper. An October breeze swept through the trees lining the courthouse plaza, sending dry leaves skittering across the damp pavement. The man who was once my husband stood a few steps away, hands tucked into his tailored slacks, wearing an expression that was equal parts relieved and perplexed. Perhaps he still expected me to cry, to grab his arm, to ask why he had promised to love me, forever only to hurriedly move another woman into our home. But I did none of that. I simply folded the divorce decree, slipped it into my designer tote, and pulled my suitcase straight toward the sleek black SUV, waiting across the street. Marcus, my hired driver, immediately stepped out to open the door. "Miss Anderson, everything is set. Are we heading straight to JFK?" I nodded. "To the airport." My voice was huskier than I expected, but it didn't tremble. I slid into the back seat, closed the door, and looked through the heavily tinted windows. David was still standing there, frowning as he watched me. He probably couldn't understand how a woman who had just been forced into a divorce, handed the keys to an old suburban condo, an SUV with 60,000 miles on it, and a meager couple of $100,000 in alimony could look so incredibly unbothered. He thought I was stupid. He thought 3 years of being a stay-at-home wife had turned me into a woman who only knew how to grocery shop, cook, do laundry, and wait for her husband. He had forgotten who I was before I married him. I had built my own boutique PR firm in Austin, single-handedly closed multi-million-dollar accounts, and pulled all-nighters to save campaigns from the brink of bankruptcy. I hadn't lost my edge. I had simply, willingly, set it aside out of love. As the car merged onto the FDR drive, leaving the courthouse behind, I unlocked my phone and checked the email I had scheduled the night before. It was 9:18 a.m., exactly 1 minute after the divorce became final. A comprehensive asset reconciliation file was automatically dispatched to David, my attorney, and several key financial institutions. The email contained the list of assets he had generously divided, but beneath each item was my own personal annotation. The $1.2 million he claimed was lost in a bad investment, traced to an offshore account under a distant cousin's name. The luxury penthouse in Tribeca, allegedly leased by his company, purchased with joint funds but deeded to Haley Lawson, his mistress. Then there was the Shell Logistics LLC in Newark, New Jersey, masking 12 separate wire transfers to that woman, totaling nearly $85,000. I had stayed silent for 8 months, not because I was oblivious, but because I was waiting to gather bulletproof evidence. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer, Robert Hayes, lit up the screen. "Quinn," the email went through. "I've filed the supplemental evidence with the judge and prepared the motion to reopen the asset division. Stick to your flight plan." I replied with 2 words. "Thank you." Then, I put my phone on silent. In a few minutes, David would read that email. In a few minutes, he would realize the fortress he thought he had built was rotting from the inside out. I leaned my head against the leather seat, watching the chaotic New York traffic. The city was gray and loud this morning, but inside my chest, there was a vast, quiet emptiness. It was the quiet of someone who had cried all her tears months ago. The first day I discovered David was cheating, I didn't cause a scene. I didn't storm into the Plaza Hotel and drag Haley out by her hair like the scorned wives in stories I'd heard. I just sat in my car, watching my husband's hand rest on the waist of a young, beautiful girl as they walked into the lobby. The tenderness with which he touched her stomach made me physically nauseous. That night, he came home and lied about a late client dinner. I looked at the personality and a faint smudge of lip gloss on his collar, served him a plate of hot dinner, and asked, "Are you tired?" He replied without missing a beat, "A little. The firm is swamped right now." From that exact second, my love for him died completely. It wasn't noisy, and it didn't struggle. It just snapped off, like a tungsten filament burning out in a light bulb. As my car took the exit toward JFK International, my phone screen lit up. It was David calling. I watched his name flash a few times before hitting decline. Immediately, a barrage of texts flooded in. "What the hell are those notes in the email? Quinn, have you been investigating?" "Me? Don't do anything crazy. Those assets have nothing to do with you. Recall." That email immediately. "If you don't blame me for what happens." I read each line, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of my mouth. Even now he was using his commanding tone, genuinely believing he could scare me into submission. I screenshotted the texts, forwarded them to Robert, and locked the screen. There was no need to argue. A person armed with legal documents doesn't waste energy throwing insults. 10 minutes later, my best friend Chloe called. The moment I answered, her anxious voice filled the car. "Quinn, did David read the email?" "His assistant just called my office asking weird, roundabout questions about you. I think he's panicking." I stared out the window. Panic is appropriate, but it's not enough. Chloe paused, lowering her voice. "And what about Haley? She checked into Mount Sinai early this morning. Apparently, she went into early labor. David is rushing there right now." I closed my eyes. The image of Haley standing in my living room 2 weeks ago, wearing a cream maternity dress and stroking her swollen belly with a provocative smile, flashed vividly in my mind. Her voice had been dripping with fake sweetness. "Quinn, I know this is hard for you to accept, but the baby is innocent. David said he only truly knew what love was when I got pregnant." I had stared at her for a long time, a young girl with red lips, wearing a diamond pendant that David had told me was a corporate gift for a client. I didn't slap her. I merely asked, "Are you sure that baby is your blessing?" Haley had scoffed. "At least it's David's son." Thinking back on it, I still found it funny. The more confident someone is in a lie, the harder they hit the ground when the truth comes out. I told Chloe, "Just have someone keep an eye on things at the hospital. Let me know if anything happens." "Quinn, are you seriously not coming back? What if something huge happens?" Today, I opened my eyes, spotting the terminal signs for JFK. I don't need to be there. There are some stages where it's best to stand far back and watch the clowns perform their own finale. Chloe sighed. "Hearing you talk gives me chills, but after what he did to you, he deserves every bit of it." I didn't reply immediately. I felt no cheap thrill of revenge, only a nameless, frigid resolve. If David had simply fallen out of love, if he had honestly asked for a divorce, it would have hurt, but I would have let him go with grace. But he chose to betray me, funnel away our joint assets, and parade his pregnant mistress in my face to humiliate me. He wanted me to leave the marriage as a loser, penniless, humiliated, and silent. Therefore, I had no choice but to teach him that pushing someone into a corner doesn't mean they will kneel. Sometimes they stand up, wipe their tears, and calculate every single debt owed. The car pulled up to the departures curb. Marcus unloaded my luggage. I adjusted. My ivory blazer smoothed my low bun and walked inside. The blast of air, conditioning cleared my head. In the massive glass reflection near the entrance, I saw myself, a 32-year-old woman, freshly divorced, devoid of a wedding, ring, and the title of wife. Yet, my eyes were brighter and calmer than they had been in 3 years. Just as I cleared TSA, an unknown number called. Guessing David had borrowed someone's phone, I answered. "Quinn Anderson." He practically ground my name through his teeth. "What do you want?" I grabbed my boarding pass and strolled toward the first-class lounge. "I want back what belongs to me. Don't think a few bank statements can scare me. The asset division was finalized. You signed the papers." "Yes, I did," I replied evenly, "but I signed them after you intentionally. Concealed marital assets, wired money to your mistress, and fabricated contracts to drain your own firm. Do you really think a judge will view that as a voluntary agreement?" The line went dead silent. I could hear his heavy, panicked breathing. A moment later, he lowered his voice, though the threat remained. "Quinn, Don't escalate. This. It won't end well for anyone. I'm at the hospital. Haley is about to deliver. Once this is over, we'll talk. I paused outside the lounge doors, watching travelers rush by. No need. You. Stay there and welcome your new baby. My lawyer will handle the talking. What is that supposed to mean? I laughed softly. Nothing. I just hope you have enough composure when the doctor steps out of the delivery room. I hung up and blocked the number. The automatic doors to the lounge slid open, enveloping me in the warm scent of espresso and soft lighting. I pulled my suitcase inside, feeling lighter, as if I had finally cut the last anchor tying me to the past. Out there, David was sprinting through a hospital to embrace his new future. As for me, I was about to board a flight to San Francisco to meet a legal team and venture capitalists to restart the agency I had abandoned for a toxic marriage. My flight hadn't even taken off, but my life had already left the ground. The moment my pen left that divorce decree, David, who thought he could step on my back to reach his new happiness, was about to learn that some prices aren't paid in dollars, but in reputation, dignity, and sleepless nights of regret. As I sat down by the window in the lounge, a text from Robert Hayes popped up. David called me 3 times, extremely agitated. He claims you are framing him, committing extortion, and ruining his reputation. I recorded every word. I stared at the message, then slowly set my phone face down on the table. In the front of me was a steaming cup of Earl Grey. Outside, an airplane sat on the tarmac like a silver bird waiting to take flight. Inside me, everything had already been in motion for a long time, quiet but irreversible. A lounge attendant walked over, asking if I needed any breakfast. I shook my head. My throat felt tight, not from heartbreak, but from a sudden flood of memories. 3 years ago, at this very airport, David had held my hand as we flew to Aspen for our honeymoon. He had insisted on carrying my bags, laughing, and promising that he would never let me carry heavy burdens for the rest of my life. 3 years later, I was at the same airport with a suitcase, but my only companion was my own clarity and a folder of damning evidence. My phone buzzed again. Chloe had sent a short video. I tapped play. In the plow-in footage, David was pacing the corridors of Mount Sinai, his tie undone, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Haley was still in the delivery room, and her mother was standing outside, crying and nagging him to sign consent forms. My daughter has been in agony since dawn. What are you standing there for? Sign. The paper, she shrieked. David snatched the clipboard from a nurse, his face pale with anxiety. Perhaps he truly was eager for this child. A son, a new family, a fresh life without me, standing by to remind him of the days when he had nothing. I closed the video as he bent down to sign. Strangely, it didn't hurt. I only felt cold at the realization that the man who called me his one and only could use the very hand that placed a wedding ring on my finger to sign for another woman's child. Another text from Chloe. Quinn, a nurse just let it slip that Haley has a B.on monoslage history of severe gynecological issues and was previously treated for complications. It seems David has no idea. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard before I typed, "Let the doctors follow protocol. I don't need to invent anything. The truth is, brutal enough on its own. I just need to stand back and watch the facade peel, away in front of his eyes." Just then, a man in a sharp navy button-down approached my table. I looked up and recognized Nathan Reed, the managing director of a venture capital firm I had met at a startup summit years before I got married. "Quinn Anderson? It's been a long time," he said. I stood up and shook his hand politely. "Nathan, I didn't expect to run into you. Here." He glanced at my suitcase, then at the boarding pass on the table. "Heading to S.A. "Yes, taking care of some business." Nathan paused, his gaze deepening. "I heard about you and David. If you ever need legal or financial backing to get your agency running again, call me. I haven't forgotten how sharp you are." His words made my vision blur for a fraction of a second. For years, David had convinced me that I had been out of the game too long, that the industry had forgotten me. He repeated it so often that I started to believe I was obsolete. Yet here, on the very day I walked away from my marriage, someone was reminding me of exactly who I was. I took Nathan's business card, keeping my voice steady while my mind raced. Thank you, Nathan. I have a feeling I'll be taking you up on that very soon. He nodded. I'll expect your call. As he walked away, the boarding announcement echoed through the speakers. I stood up, grabbing the handle of my suitcase. Just then, David called again, using his assistant's number. I answered, and before I could speak, he snarled into the receiver. Quinn, where the hell are you? You need to come back here and talk to me right now. I walked toward the gate, my tone feather light. I have no obligation to return. To you. You think you won? I'll have the court freeze that suburban condo, and I won't let you touch a dime of the money in your accounts. I let out a soft laugh. Do it. The faster you act, the more you show how terrified you are. There was a beat of silence before his voice dropped into a desperate plea. Quinn, don't push me. Haley is in surgery. I don't have the mental capacity to fight with you right now. I stopped at the jet bridge entrance, bathed in the white fluorescent light. Then you better save your energy. Because what you're about to face isn't just me. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I hung up, handed my boarding pass to the agent, and walked down the tunnel. When I settled into my seat, I looked out the small window. The gray New York skyline was falling away. As the plane roared down the runway and lifted off, my heart settled into an absolute, unnatural calm. My life was finally taking off, while David remained trapped in a hospital hallway where the truth was waiting to tear his dream of fatherhood to shreds. The moment the plane left the tarmac, it felt like I was being pulled out of a long, suffocating nightmare. I switched my phone to airplane mode, but not before catching one last text from Chloe. Quinn, David is losing it outside the OR. The doctors said they need to monitor Haley because of some abnormalities. I locked the screen, tucked the phone into my bag, and leaned back. The hum of the jet engines filled my ears, but in my mind, I could only hear Haley's voice. From the day she visited my house, she had touched her stomach and smiled coyly. You've had the title of wife for 3 years. It's time you give David back too. Me and my baby. I remembered looking down at her white designer heels, pristine and sharp, just like the fragile, innocent victim persona she tried to project. But in her eyes, I only saw a calculating predator. A truly weak woman doesn't go to a wife's house to flaunt her pregnancy. A truly pitiful woman doesn't wear jewelry bought with stolen marital funds and call it a gift of love. I unzipped my bag and pulled out a slim manila folder. Inside were copies of bank statements, text transcripts, the deed to the Tribeca penthouse, the fraudulent shell company contracts, and a highly detailed itinerary. San Francisco was the first battleground. Robert Hayes had arranged for me to meet a forensic accounting team in the financial district to lock down the capital from David's media firm before he could siphon any more out. After that, I would meet with Nathan Reed. Everything had to move faster than David could anticipate. I knew David. When backed into a corner, he would never admit fault. He would bite back, play the victim, accuse me of being greedy, vindictive, and slanderous. I wasn't going to give him the time to write his script. When the plane finally began its descent into SFO, my heart picked up the pace. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of knowing that the moment the wheels hit the runway, the real war began. The moment I turned off airplane mode, my phone vibrated violently. Texts, missed calls, and alerts from my lawyer and Chloe flooded the screen. I opened Chloe's messages first. Quinn, disaster. The doctor just made David sign emergency surgical consent. Haley couldn't deliver naturally. Her mom is screaming her head off, and David looks like a ghost. Following the text was an audio file. I plugged in my AirPods and hit play. The chaotic noise of the hospital echoed, then a nurse's clear voice. Sir, you are Haley Lawson's family, correct? We need to perform an emergency C-section. Additionally, her prenatal records indicate a history of severe pelvic infections and prior terminations. We need you to sign acknowledging the Plesket. Surgical risks. David's voice cracked, full of shock and rage. Prior terminations? What are you talking about? She told me this was her first pregnancy. The nurse remained professional. Please remain calm, sir. This information was provided in her medical history upon admission. Right now, the priority is a safety of the mother and child. I took out my AirPods, watching the passengers stand up to grab their overhead luggage. My hands were cold, but my mind was laser-focused. The first layer of the lie had cracked. David finally heard what Haley had been hiding. But that still wasn't the ultimate truth. Robert called just as I stepped into the terminal. Quinn. David filed an emergency injunction to freeze the suburban condo and your personal accounts, claiming you're hiding assets. I walked briskly toward the exit. Good. The more he pushes, the more he proves. He's trying to extort a post-divorce settlement. Did you file the supplementary evidence regarding his transfers to Haley? Done. And one more thing. David's company is showing signs of wiping their accounting servers. I stopped dead in my tracks. Have the IT guys back it up immediately. If they delete it, we subpoena the banks and their top vendors. Do not lose the trail on the Austin Project funds. Robert paused for a second. You're more prepared than I thought. I looked through the airport windows at the blinding California sun. I trusted the wrong person once. I can't afford to do it twice. Getting into the Uber Black Chloe had arranged, I received another call from David. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. This time, his voice wasn't aggressive. It was raspy, rushed, and panicked. Quinn, tell me the truth. What do you know about Haley? I watched the traffic on the 101, my lips pressing into a thin line. You're asking the wrong person. The one you should be asking is currently in the OR. Don't play games with me. Did you know she had previous pregnancies? I could hear him hyperventilating. His mind was probably a vortex of anxiety, jealousy, humiliation, and betrayal. I felt no pity, not an ounce. I know more than you think, David, I said coolly, but I have no obligation to save you from the consequences of your own choices. Quinn! He screamed, but his yell didn't scare me anymore. I enunciated every word clearly. David, you told me not to interfere with your new happiness, so stay right there and enjoy every single drop of it. I hung up. The car sped into the sun-drenched streets of San Francisco. Ahead of me were law offices, contracts, and the counteroffensive I had spent months planning. Behind me, 3,000 miles away, David was standing outside a planter surgical ward, realizing for the first time that I wasn't the one being played. The car pulled up to a glass skyscraper on Montgomery Street. The California sun bounced off the pavement, almost blinding. I stepped out, pulling my suitcase, and walked straight into the lobby. The smell of roasted coffee from a nearby Blakeslid cafe hit me, bringing back memories of the days I used to run my own agency, staying up until 3 a.m. just to perfect a PR pitch. Back then, I was exhausted, but I was free. During my 3 years with David, I lived in a massive townhouse, yet felt like I was locked in a gilded cage. Today, standing in this vibrant, unfamiliar city, I felt like someone surfacing from deep water, finally taking a breath. Robert Hayes was waiting for me in a 12th floor conference room. With him was a Drady, forensic accountant named Megan, and 2 paralegals. Spread across the large table were laptops, bank statements, corporate filings, and stacks of paper, marked with red tabs. As soon as I sat down, Robert slid a thick file toward me. Quinn, David's team, filed the asset freeze, but their grounds are flimsy. The bigger issue is that this morning, his firm, Harrison Media, initiated transfers of several major client contracts to a shell vendor. I picked up the file, quickly scanning the highlighted lines. Harrison Media was the brainchild I had built with David from the ground up. When we got married, I stepped back so he could take the CEO title, thinking spouses didn't need to keep score. Looking at the contracts being siphoned away, I realized that misplaced trust was just a knife waiting to stab you in the back. Who owns this shell vendor? I asked. Megan answered immediately. Haley Lawson. But the proxy signatory operating it is her younger brother. I let out a dry, cold laugh. So it wasn't just the money. She was stealing my clients, too. Robert nodded. They moved fast, but sloppily. They left a massive paper trail. If you sign this authorization to flag suspicious transactions, we can serve emergency injunctions to the banks and key clients before the transfers clear. I picked up a pen and signed without hesitation. The ink flowed across the pages, each signature feeling like a pair of scissors cutting another dead tie. I used to tremble when I signed our marriage license, trembling with happiness. Today, I signed to take back my life. and my hand was rock steady. As I signed the 7th page, my phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime call from Chloe. I looked at Robert, who gestured for the team to pause. I answered. A screen showed the hospital hallway. Chloe kept the camera low, filming from a distance. David was standing outside the operating room, hands on his hips. His custom dress shirt was wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair a mess. Haley's mother sat on a bench crying and pointing a finger at him. If anything happens to my daughter, you're responsible. She's having your child. And look what you've done to her. David whipped around, his voice ragged. She lied to me about her medical history. How much more am I supposed to take? The woman froze, then shrieked. Lied? Everyone has a past. What matters is that the baby in her belly is your flesh and blood. I watched David's face on the screen. He couldn't answer. The seed of doubt had already taken root in his eyes. Once trust is fractured, even the smallest truth can shatter it entirely. Chloe whispered into the mic. Quinn, the doctors just said the surgery is wrapping up. But I heard a nurse say they need to run some extra panels on the baby. Before I could reply, the OR doors swung open in the video. A doctor stepped out, pulling down his mask, looking exhausted but calm. David rushed forward. Doctor, how are they? Mother and baby are stable, the doctor said. It's a boy, 7 pounds. But please calm down, sir. We have some information we need to discuss with you. Privately. David froze. What information? The doctor glanced around the hallway, lowering his voice. Regarding the baby's preliminary blood work. Please step into the consultation room. The color drained from David's face. Haley's mother jumped up, but a nurse gently blocked her. Only the father for now, please. Hearing the word father, my throat tightened. Not out of pain, but because I knew that in just a few minutes, that title would become the most agonizing slap in the face David had ever received. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. The conference room was dead. Silent. Robert looked at me, seemingly sensing that a bomb had just gone off. Quinn, should we continue? He asked gently. I picked up my pen and signed the final page. Yes. Let the hospital handle the truth. Our job is to barricade every exit David has before he wakes up to reality. Just then, a text from Chloe popped up. Quinn, the doctor just took David in the room. I overheard them chunking about the baby's blood type. David looks like he's going to pass out. I stared at the words, my heart slowing down beat by beat. Outside, the San Hode. Francisco's sun was blinding. But inside a hospital in New York, the real storm had finally made landfall. My phone started vibrating wildly. Chloe was calling. I knew the moment I'd been waiting months for had arrived. I answered, and before I could say a word, Chloe was breathless. Quinn. David just walked out of the consultation room. He's pale as a ghost. The doctor told him the baby's blood type doesn't match his. I pressed the tip of my pen against the notepad, leaving a tiny black dot like a bullet hole in an old canvas. Are you sure? Positive. I heard it. The doctor said they need a DNA test for absolute confirmation. But based on genetics, it's virtually impossible. David had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. In the conference room, Robert and Megan were watching me in silence. I didn't laugh, nor did I cry. I didn't feel a rush of vindication. It felt more like lancing a deeply infected wound, painful but necessary. David had used that pregnancy to force me out of my own home. He had told me Haley needed care, the baby needed a family, and that I should just walk away gracefully. Now, the very weapon he used to destroy me was being driven straight into his own chest. I lowered my voice. Keep watching, Chloe, but don't blow your cover. I want this turning into some trashy reality show drama. Got it, she said quickly. But Haley's mom is throwing a fit. She's screaming. That the hospital mixed up the charts, demanding apologies. David hasn't said a single word. He's just staring at the door to the recovery room. I closed my eyes, picturing his face. The man who was so arrogant he thought he could calculate every variable in life was now standing in a sterile hallway, watching his entire world crack open because of a single sentence. If I were the Quinn from a year ago, my heart would have broken for him. Today, I only felt that this silence was long overdue. Robert slid a copy of an emergency injunction across the table. Quinn, the Banks just responded. If we submit the evidence before 4 p.m. EST, they will freeze all accounts associated with Haley's shell company. I opened my eyes and put down the phone. Do it now. I want every single dime. Moving out of those accounts flagged. Megan spoke up. There's one more thing. We cracked the deposit contract for the Pacific Heights condo. Haley is listed as the buyer, but the funds were wired directly from Harrison Media's corporate account. Over $2.5 million. I smiled grimly. $2.5 million for a love nest. David is incredibly generous with money that isn't his. I signed the injunction. At that exact moment, my screen lit up. David was calling again. I let it ring. I stared at his name, remembering the nights I had, called him with a 102-degree fever, only for it to go straight to voicemail because he was with Haley. I remembered our anniversary, when he said he had a late board meeting, and I later saw an Instagram photo of Haley holding a man's hand-to-hand wearing the watch I had bought for my husband. Coldness isn't born overnight. It is forged by being abandoned over and over. Again, the call ended, then immediately started ringing again. I answered. There was no screaming this time, only a voice so hoarse it was barely recognizable. Quinn, since when did you know? I looked out the window at the bustling financial district, the cars flowing, like a river, entirely ignorant to the fact that someone across the country was falling apart. What are you referring to? Stop playing games. The baby. Haley's passed. Did you know everything? I heard him gasping for air. His brain was likely short-circuiting between panic, jealousy, humiliation, and the ultimate sense of betrayal. I felt no pity. I knew enough to walk away without looking back, I said. Why didn't you tell me? He roared. His question made me laugh a soft, razor-sharp sound. Tell you what? When I warned you that Haley wasn't who she seemed, you called me vicious. When I asked about the company finances, you called me greedy. When I stayed silent, you thought I was a fool. David, you never wanted the truth. You just wanted an excuse to cheat so you wouldn't feel guilty. The line went dead silent. Then, his voice dropped to a whisper. Quinn, I made a mistake. Those 3 words drifted into my ear like dust. Once upon a time, they might have softened my heart. Now, they couldn't rebuild a burned-down house. They couldn't unbreak the lonely nights I spent crying. And they certainly couldn't erase the image of Haley rubbing her belly in my living room. It's too late, I said. Quinn, please, David, I cut him off. The doctor only gave you a preliminary result and you're already breaking down. You better brace yourself, because what's coming next is going to hurt a hell of a lot more. I hung up and blocked his number. As the screen faded to black, I caught my reflection in the glass. My eyes were steady. The enduring, suffering wife was dead. Robert pushed a folder toward me. Quinn, Nathan Reed's car is waiting. Downstairs. Your pitch to his investment group starts in 30 minutes. I stood up and grabbed my bag. Let's go. Today wasn't just the day David found out he was raising another man's child. Today was the day he started losing everything he had ever stolen from me. I rode the elevator down with Robert, clutching the heavy portfolio of signed documents. The red digital numbers ticked down slowly, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. I wasn't scared. I just knew that once the doors opened, the shadows I had been living in would be gone forever. Nathan Reed was waiting in the lobby, dressed in a crisp white shirt, holding his phone. Beside him was an older, distinguished-looking man. Quinn, Nathan smiled. This is Frank, our head of due diligence. He's reviewed the preliminary data on your old agency. I shook Frank's hand. Frank, thank you for your time. Frank studied me carefully, not judging, but assessing. He was looking at a woman who had just walked out of the ashes but hadn't been burned. Miss Anderson, I'll be direct. If the documents hold up, the branding and client pipeline of Harrison Media have your fingerprints all over them. If you want to, spin off and start fresh. We are prepared to fund you. But first, you have to prove that the intellectual property and client data weren't legally surrendered. To David Harrison. I opened my bag and pulled out a sleek black flash drive, setting it on the Crive lobby table. Every original business plan, the first signed contracts, email, archives with legacy clients, and brand design files are on here. I didn't come to ask anyone to save me. I came to take back what I built. Nathan looked at me, a glimmer of deep respect in his eyes. I like that answer. Let's head to the private room. We moved to a secluded meeting room in a high-end cafe on the ground floor. Outside, the world went on, people laughing, espresso machines hissing. Inside, I opened my files, walking them through the agency's inception, the accounts I secured before my marriage, and the projects David had slyly reassigned to himself. The more I spoke, the more I felt an old fire reigniting in my chest. I hadn't forgotten how to be a shark. I had just let a toxic marriage put me to sleep. Mid-pitch, Robert's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression hardening. He leaned in and whispered, "Quinn, the bank just froze Haley's Shell account. A transfer for $3 million was blocked right at the wire." I stopped writing. Where was it heading? To a personal account under Haley's mother's name. I scoffed quietly. So the rats were trying to flee the sinking ship. Nathan put his coffee cup down. Did David get the blood test news? I looked at him, not surprised he knew. VCs always have their own networks. Part of it, but not the whole story. Frank frowned. If his personal life blows up at the same time as a financial scandal, clients will bolt. In PR and venture capital, personal reputation is often worth more than the assets. Exactly, I nodded. And that's something David never understood. He thought money could cover up his filth, but once trust collapses, money is just numbers. Under a legal microscope. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Just as we finalized the initial framework for establishing my new LLC and protecting my IP, Chloe texted again. David demanded a rush on the DNA test. Haley woke up and is crying, hysterically, swearing the hospital mixed up the charts. I stared at the message, completely numb. Liars always blame the universe when the truth backs them into a corner. A voice memo followed. I pressed it to my ear. Haley's weak but desperate voice. Played. David, you have to believe me. The baby is yours. I went through hell. To give you a son, how can you doubt me now? Then David's voice, low and terrifying. Then why do your medical records show prior abortions? Why did you tell me I was your first? Haley sobbed. I was scared you'd judge me. I was scared of losing you. David let out a dry, hollow laugh. And the baby? Were you so scared of losing? Me, you decided to hide who the real father is, too. The recording cut off. I put my phone down, my fingers clenching into fists. I phrase I was scared of losing you sounded so sickeningly familiar. I used to be terrified of losing David. I shrank myself, ignored his late nights, ignored the missing cash, ignored him smiling at his phone in the dark. But eventually, I realized that someone you have to suffer to keep isn't yours to begin with. Robert spoke up. Quinn, tomorrow afternoon, the judge is holding the first emergency hearing regarding the asset division. David's team will likely ask for a continuance, citing a family emergency. I capped my pen and looked him dead in the eye. No continuances. If he had time to cheat and launder money, he has time to face a judge. Nathan was quiet for a moment before saying, Quinn, if you need a temporary office space, my firm has an empty suite you can use. I looked at him, feeling my hardened exterior soften just a fraction. Thank you, Nathan, but I want to lease my own space. I need to stand on my own 2 feet. Stepping out of the building, the San Francisco evening was rolling in. The setting sun stretched golden across the pavement. I took a deep breath. My phone lit up again. An unknown number. You think you've won? If I lose everything, I won't let you live in peace. Either. It was Haley. I forwarded it to Robert, then deleted it from my screen. She was wrong. I never ruined her life. I just stopped letting her and David ruin mine. Robert called immediately, his voice strict. Quinn, don't delete those threats. Forward everything to me. If she keeps it up, we'll file for a restraining order. I know. She's not threatening me because she's strong. She's threatening me because she's terrified. Exactly, Robert said. And David is even more terrified. I just got word he ordered his assistant to purge the accounting servers. He's trying to alter the ledgers before tomorrow. I gripped my bag. Draft a cease and desist tonight. If they alter anything, after a legal dispute is filed, I want it on record as spoliation of evidence. On it, I got into my waiting car. As the city lights blurred past, I realized something profound. I had thought divorce would leave me exhausted and lost, but the further I got from David, the clearer my mind became. You aren't weak because you lose someone. You're weak because you try to hold on to someone who is already rotting inside you. When I arrived at the luxury corporate apartment Chloe had booked for me, there was another video waiting. This time, it was from the hospital parking garage in New York. David was standing opposite Haley's mother. His face was thunderous while the older woman grabbed his arm, crying, "You can't abandon them. My daughter almost died for you." David ripped his arm away, his voice hoarse. "Go ask your daughter whose kid she just had." The woman froze, then screamed, "How can you say that? She lived with you, she slept beside you. And now you want to wash your hands of her?" David laughed a twisted, terrifying sound. "Lived with me? Are you sure I was the only one she was living with?" Haley's mother slapped him across the face. The sound echoed in the concrete. Garage. David didn't flinch. His eyes were bloodshot. He just turned on his heel and walked away, leaving the woman wailing behind him. I closed the video and tossed the phone onto the counter. I didn't feel vindicated. It just confirmed that the new family he traded my marriage for was cheaper than wet paper. Before I could unpack, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. Nathan Reed was standing there holding a high-end takeout bag. I opened the door but kept my loaded distance. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Nathan held out the bag. "I realized you probably haven't eaten all day. It's just some chicken soup and a salad. Don't misunderstand, I just don't want my future business partner collapsing before we sign the papers." I let out a genuine laugh, the first one all day. "Thank you, but you don't need to worry about me like this." His gaze softened. "Quinn, being strong doesn't mean you have to endure everything alone." My hand froze on the handle of the paper bag. For 3 years, I had heard nothing but commands, criticisms, and complaints. It had been a very long time since someone had said something so fundamentally kind to me. "I'm just not used to it," I murmured. Nathan didn't push. He stayed in the hallway. "If you need someone to sit with, to you during the virtual hearing tomorrow, I can clear my schedule." "No." I shook my head. "I need to do this myself." He nodded. "I respect that. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a long day." The door clicked shut. I set the food on the island and sat on a stool for a long time. The smell of the warm broth filled the sterile, unfamiliar apartment, and suddenly my eyes stung. Not because of Nathan, and not because of David. It was because I realized how deeply I had neglected myself. I used to cook every meal for David, wait up for him, worry about his stress, but I had forgotten to ask myself if I was hurting, if I was hungry, or if I just needed to be held. I ate every bite of that soup. Then, I opened my laptop and reviewed the files. One last time. Near midnight, Robert emailed the filed emergency injunctions. Moments later, Chloe texted, "David just left the hospital. He's heading to your old townhouse to dig through Haley's things." My heart sank slightly. That townhouse used to be my home. I picked out the beige curtains. I bought the ceramic dinnerware. Now, David was returning to it. Not to remember me, but to dig for proof of another woman's betrayal. Life's irony is so perfectly crafted it doesn't need authors. Right before I went to sleep, a text flashed on my screen. "You think you won? If I go down, I'm taking you with me." I screenshotted Haley's latest threat, sent it to Robert, locked the deadbolt, pulled the blackout curtains, and went to bed. Outside, San Francisco was glowing. The storm wasn't over. A cornered Haley would thrash wildly, and a shattered David would try to bite back. But I was no longer the woman waiting in a cold kitchen. I had stepped into the light, and anyone trying to drag me back into the dark was going to pay the price. I woke up at 6 a.m. Despite barely sleeping, I felt sharply awake. The city outside was blanketed in a thin morning fog. I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning my navy blazer, pinning my hair back, and swiping on a neutral lipstick. The woman staring back at me wasn't the anxious wife waiting for a text from her husband. She was exhausted, but unbreakable. My phone lit up. Chloe sent a photo taken from a distance. David was standing in front of our old Upper East Side townhouse, holding a stack of papers, his assistant hovering nervously nearby. "He tore the house apart," Chloe texted. "Found Haley's prenatal records and a private diary." I stared at the photo. That was the balcony where I used to grow climbing roses. That was the front door I used to lock late at night. Now it was a crime scene of his own making. Robert called as I walked to the elevator. Quinn, David's lawyers just filed a request to postpone this afternoon's hearing. Severe family crisis. Denied, I said flatly as I stepped into the lobby. Tell them that hiding marital assets cannot be delayed due to a personal crisis of his own creation. Done. Also, Harrison Media just issued an internal memo accusing you of corporate espionage, claiming you stole company data. I let out a cold laugh. The counterattack had begun. I have the draft rebuttal ready. The data I possess pertains to accounts I originated prior to marriage. And prior to my resignation as operating director, I have the digital signatures and timestamps to prove it. Send it. We file it immediately to kill his narrative. When I arrived at the law firm, Megan had a massive flowchart projected on the blank screen. Red arrows connected Harrison Media to Haley's shell company, then to her mother's account, and finally to a mysterious third account. This is the $3 million that was blocked yesterday, Megan pointed. And we just identified the owner of the third account, Tyler Brooks. He was a marketing associate at Harrison Media, fired 8 months ago. The name made me freeze. Tyler, a smooth-talking kid who used to linger around the office parties. I suddenly remembered a corporate retreat where I saw Haley standing uncomfortably close to him by the valet stand. Back then, I thought I was being paranoid. Women's intuition is rarely wrong. We just gaslight ourselves into ignoring it. Haley didn't just have David. She had Tyler, and David was simply the deepest wallet to fund them both. Chloe called, her voice tight like a piano wire. Quinn, David is going insane. He found Tyler's name in the diary. He's making his assistant track the guy down. I looked at Robert. Add Tyler Brooks to the subpoena list for the financial tracking. Also, Chloe added, the hospital rushed the DNA test. David forced them to. Results should be in by tomorrow. I exhaled slowly. Tomorrow. The final thread of David's delusion was about to snap. The virtual hearing that afternoon was tense. David didn't appear on camera. Only his high-priced Manhattan litigators. They argued aggressively that I had signed the divorce settlement and forfeited my rights. I sat silently until they accused me of extorting David during his vulnerable time with a newborn. I leaned toward the microphone. I am not extorting anyone. I am asking the court to investigate marital assets that were deliberately concealed prior to the execution of the divorce decree. If Mr. Harrison claims transparency, I invite him to open the ledgers regarding the Shell LLC registered to Miss Haley Lawson. The other side went dead silent. The judge took meticulous notes. Then, Robert pulled up the money flow chart featuring Tyler Brooks. The opposing counsel visibly blanched. They didn't expect us to move this fast. After the hearing ended, Chloe texted. Explosion at the hospital. David went back and confronted Haley about Tyler. They were screaming so loud people were recording. Did she admit to the shell company? I asked instantly. Yes. She screamed that she helped him secure the fake contracts. I'm trying to get the video. Get it, but stay safe, I replied. I looked out the window. The chess pieces David thought he controlled were now strangling each other. By evening, the video was in my inbox. The audio was scrambled with hospital noise, but Haley's screeching voice cut through. Don't act like you're innocent, she screamed from her hospital bed, looking pale and deranged. You signed those contracts. You wired that money. You bought that penthouse. Now your ex-wife is coming for you. And you blame me? David's voice shook with rage. You conned me into raising another man's kid. Haley laughed hysterically. And you conned your wife to hide your money with me. You're no better than I am. I paused the video. The room was deathly quiet. Robert stood beside me, his eyes wide. She just confessed on tape, Robert whispered. She admitted David used her to launder marital assets. Save the original file. Subpoena the hospital security footage to corroborate, I said, my voice eerily calm. Just then Nathan called. Quinn, 3 of Harrison Media's biggest clients just issued stop payment notices. The rumors of the legal battle and financial fraud are out. I closed my eyes. Bad news travels at the speed of light. I'm meeting with 2 of them tomorrow. I'm not using David's scandal to win them back. I'm going to win them with a better strategy. That night, my phone rang. It was David. I didn't answer. He texted. Quinn, Haley is trying to drag me down with her. Help me. I'll testify she stole it. I'll give it all back to you. I stared at the screen. He was still trying to act like a savior. I forwarded the text to Robert and replied to David with one sentence. You can't give back what the court already knows you stole. He called immediately. This time, I picked up. Quinn, please. Are you really going to be this heartless? I leaned against the glass window, looking down at the city. Heartless is bringing your pregnant mistress into my home. Heartless is hiding our money and leaving me with pennies. I'm just following the law. He was hyperventilating. If she leaks those documents, the company is dead. The company won't die because of her leaks. It will die because you created those documents in the first place. I hung up. Just before midnight, an anonymous email landed in my new corporate inbox. The subject line read, "You should hear this." I routed it through a security scan and forwarded it to Robert before opening audio file. It was an audio file. I put my headphones on. It was David's voice, low and conspiratorial. We'll put the shell company in your name. Once the divorce is final, I'll funnel the equity back. Quinn has no idea. She's been sitting at home. She doesn't know anything about the books. Haley giggled. Are you sure? I don't want to get sued. Just be a good girl and have my son. I'll handle the rest, David replied. I took off the headphones. My hands were ice cold. Even knowing the truth, hearing him say Quinn has no idea felt like a knife to the ribs. While I had been blaming myself for our failing marriage, he had been laughing at my trust. I didn't cry. My tears were far too expensive to waste on a man like David. Robert, I called my lawyer immediately. We have the audio. It's premeditated. Affreux? Who sent it? Probably Haley. She's backed into a corner. Let her do the dirty work, Robert said grimly. We just use the ammunition. The next morning, the DNA results came back. Chloe sent me the text at 7 a.m. It's official. 0% probability. David is not the father. I sat in my apartment, watching the sun rise over San Francisco. The final door had slammed shut. Hours later, another video leaked. David, standing in the boardroom of Harrison Media, looking haggard and unhinged, screaming at his IT team. Wipe the servers. Delete the vendor files. If anyone asks, the hard drives crashed. A terrified employee whispered, Sir, the court issued a preservation order. Do it, David roared. The video ended. It was over. He had just committed a felony on camera. The emergency hearing the next day was a bloodbath. David's lawyers were completely paralyzed by the onslaught of evidence. The shell accounts, the hospital confession, the leaked audio, and the video of him attempting to destroy evidence. The judge didn't just freeze his assets. He ordered a full forensic audit of Harrison Media, placed an immediate lien on the Tribeca penthouse, and referred David's server-wiping attempt to the district attorney's office for criminal and the 7 obstruction. David sat on the Zoom call, looking like a hollow shell of a human being. When the judge read the ruling, he didn't even blink. He looked through the screen, his eyes finding mine. He mouthed the words, I'm sorry. I closed my laptop. 1 month later, the forensic audit proved everything. The assets were clawed back and redistributed. The shell company was dismantled, and Tyler Brooks, Haley were hit with civil fraud suits. David was ousted as CEO of the company. He had stolen from me, facing potential jail time for obstruction of justice. I never saw him again. He sent me long emails begging for forgiveness, claiming he realized too late what he had lost. I deleted every single one without reading them. Apologies born out of total defeat aren't apologies. They are just regret for getting caught. 3 months later, Anderson Strategy signed its first major client, then its second. I leased a beautiful office in the Soma district with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. On the day my firm's logo went up on the wall, Chloe flew in from New York. She hugged me from behind, wiping away a tear. You're finally back. I smiled, watching the sunlight catch the metal lettering of my name. No, I said softly. I'm not back. This is a brand new version of me. That evening, I walked alone along the Embarcadero. The wind off the water was cold, carrying the scent of salt and absolute freedom. I was no longer David, Harrison's discarded wife. I was no longer the woman forced to endure a mistress's taunts in her own home. I was Quinn Anderson. I had been broken, I had been betrayed, and I had been foolish. But I pulled myself out of the dirt before they could bury me, and I built an empire on their ashes.